I want to start with something I have not said out loud to many people. When I found out my wife was having an affair, my first feeling was not anger. It was relief. Not because I wanted the marriage to end, not because I didn't love her, but because for 2 years I had been wondering whether I was losing my mind, and finding out the truth, however devastating the truth was, meant that I was not. The things I had sensed and questioned and talked myself out of and returned to and questioned again were real. The map in my head had been matching the territory. I just hadn't known it. Relief, then grief, then, eventually, something that became anger. But first, relief. My name is James. I'm 47 years old. I was married for 15 years to a woman named Caroline. We have one son, Lucas, who is 13. I am an architect. I design structures that are meant to hold things. I have spent 15 years in a structure I thought I was building well. Let me tell you about the 2 years. Caroline and I had always been a couple who communicated. I want to say this clearly because it is relevant to everything that follows. We talked. We processed. We had the specific quality of a marriage where difficult things were said rather than accumulated. I thought this was one of our strengths. What I did not understand is that communication, like anything, can be performed. That a person who is skilled at seeming open can use that skill to redirect questions before they find their target. 2 years ago, I started feeling something I couldn't articulate. Not a suspicion exactly, or not only a suspicion. A sense that the marriage had changed in a way that had no obvious cause. Caroline seemed present, but somehow behind glass. Close, but not quite reachable. When I said this to her, she said I was describing her stress. She had been having a difficult year professionally. She was working on a significant project. She was tired. All of this was true. And so I located my feeling inside her stress, and I left it there. Several months later, I felt it again. Same quality, the behind glass feeling. I said something again. Caroline said that I had a pattern of identifying problems in the marriage during her difficult professional periods, and that she found this hard, that it felt like I was adding to her burden. I apologized. I want to note this moment carefully, because it is the moment where the erosion became structural. I apologized for noticing something real. And in apologizing, I communicated to both of us that my noticing was the problem rather than what I was noticing. I built the lesson into my own behavior. When I feel something, I should check whether I am being unfair before I say it. I spent 8 months checking. What broke it open was a text message to the wrong person. Caroline sent me a text that was not intended for me. It happened in the way these things happen. She was texting 2 people simultaneously and the messages crossed. The text that arrived on my phone was 3 words. I miss you. I looked at it. I knew it was not meant for me because the specific quality of those words, the way they were pitched, something in the shorthand of them was not pitched at me. I have been receiving texts from my wife for 15 years, and this one did not feel like mine. I said, I think this was meant for someone else. She looked at her phone. Then she looked at me. And I watched, in real time, the specific calculation that a person makes when they are deciding whether to maintain a lie or let it go. It took about 4 seconds. Then she said, I need to talk to you. She told me. 2 years. A man she had met at a conference. Someone who worked in a related field in another city. She had seen him when she traveled for work. She had maintained it through all the conversations we had had about stress and professional difficulty and my tendency to notice things at inconvenient times. 2 years. I said, were you ever going to tell me? She said, I don't know. I wanted to, but I didn't know how. I said, you had 2 years. She said, I know. I said, Caroline, I have spent 8 months apologizing to myself for noticing that something was wrong. And something was wrong. I need you to understand what those 8 months cost me. She said, I'm sorry. I said, I know you are. I need you to understand anyway. We tried counseling. I want to be honest about this. We tried hard. 3 months of real effort, real honesty, real work. We were not the couple who saved the marriage, but we were the couple who understood, by the end of 3 months, exactly why we couldn't. and that understanding made what came next possible. The divorce took 11 months. We have shared custody of Lucas, who is 13, and who processes things in the steady, interior way of a boy who has learned to live comfortably inside his own head. He asked me once whether I was angry at his mother. I said I had been. He said, "Are you now?" I said, "Not anymore." He said, "Good. Then we can all just be regular people." Regular people. 13 years old, and he already knows that regular is what you're aiming for when everything else has been used up. Lucas is fine. He will continue to be fine because Caroline and I have both decided that being regular people is worth more than being right. The first feeling was relief. I have been honest about this, and I will continue to be honest about it. The truth, even the expensive truth, even the truth that costs you the thing you thought you were building, is almost always lighter than the version of reality you have been carrying in its absence. I spent 2 years carrying the weight of not knowing whether I was right about what I felt. The truth removed that weight. What replaced it was grief and anger and the hard work of restructuring a life. But grief and anger and hard work are things I know how to carry. They have weight, but they have shape. They can be moved. The not knowing had no shape. It just pressed. The truth gave it shape, and I could work with that. I want to say something about Lucas, my 13-year-old, because he is the center of this story, even though he appears mostly at the edges. Lucas is the person I think about when I think about what all of this was for. Not the legal process, not the rebuilding of my financial life, not even the rebuilding of my own perception of myself. Lucas is the reason all of it had to be done carefully and done well, and done with the specific understanding that how two people end a marriage shapes the people their children become. Caroline and I co-parent. I will not tell you this is easy because it is not easy. It is two adults who have hurt each other trying to be adults anyway, in the specific sustained way that parenting requires, because a 13-year-old is watching and learning from what he sees. What I want him to see is this, that things can go deeply, painfully wrong between two people who loved each other, and that those two people can still choose to be steady, that the choice to be steady is not weakness or denial. It is the hardest and most important thing adults do for their children. Lucas asked me once whether I was lonely. I said, "Sometimes, less than I expected." He said, "Why less?" I said, "Because I thought loneliness was what I had been feeling in the marriage for a while. And it turns out what I had been feeling was the particular loneliness of being with someone and not being seen. That kind of loneliness is heavier than being alone." He said, "That makes sense. You seem lighter now." I said, "I am lighter. Not happier necessarily. Lighter." He said, "I think lighter can get to happy." He is 13. He may be right. I want to say something about the first feeling, the relief. I have been honest about this with my therapist and with a few close friends, and I am being honest about it here. The first thing I felt when I knew the truth was relief. Relief that I was not crazy. Relief that the 2 years of sensing something and talking myself out of it had been 2 years of accurate sensing. Relief that my perception of reality had been correct. This matters because I think a lot of people in situations like mine, people who have been inside an erosion of their own perception, who have been redirected away from their own noticing, experience something similar and feel guilty about it. They feel they should feel anger first, or grief first, or hurt first, and then they feel relief, and they don't know what to do with it. The relief is not shameful. The relief is your nervous system recognizing that the gap between your perception and your stated reality has closed. It is your brain understanding that you were not wrong about what you sensed. That is a legitimate and human response, and it does not need to be explained away. I felt relief, then grief, then anger, then something that has been slowly becoming a clearer-eyed version of myself than I had been for 2 years. That version of myself is still being built. Lucas watches it being built. I hope he takes from the watching the understanding that people can come apart and put themselves back together, and that putting themselves back together is worth doing carefully. It is worth doing carefully. Thank you for being here. Subscribe if you haven't. I'll see you in the next one.